Hello horror lovers, welcome to the channel. Before the terror begins, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, as it will help me a lot. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I stood at the edge of Darkwood Forest, its dense canopy looming before me like an impenetrable wall. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the adventure ahead. The forest had always been a source of local legends and whispered warnings, but I, Lisa Monroe, was determined to uncover its secrets. "You've got this, Lisa," I muttered to myself, adjusting the straps of my backpack. "It's just a forest, nothing more." With one final glance at the world of light behind me, I stepped into the shadows of Darkwood. The transition was immediate and unsettling. The sounds of the nearby town faded away, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. My footsteps, muffled by a thick carpet of decaying leaves, were the only sound that dared to break the quiet. As I ventured deeper, the trees grew closer together, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the fading daylight. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a lifeline. "Okay. This is definitely creepier than I expected," I admitted to the empty air, my voice sounding small and insignificant among the towering trees. A sudden rustling to my left made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, half expecting to see some monstrous creature. Instead, a startled rabbit darted across my path and disappeared into the underbrush. I let out a nervous laugh. "Get it together, girl. It's just the local wildlife." But as I continued on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every snapping twig or shifting shadow seemed to carry a sinister intent. I pressed on, driven by a mixture of curiosity and stubbornness. I'd come to Darkwood to investigate the strange stories surrounding it, and I wasn't about to let a case of the jitters send me running back to town. After what felt like hours of walking, I paused to check my map and take a swig from my water bottle. That's when I heard it. A faint rhythmic chanting carried on the breeze. "What the hell?" I whispered, straining my ears to catch the sound again. There it was, unmistakable this time. The chanting was coming from somewhere deeper in the forest, and against my better judgment, I felt drawn to it. My feet began moving of their own accord, leading me towards the source of the mysterious sound. As I got closer, I could make out flickering lights through the trees. My heart began to race, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through my veins. I crouched low, moving as quietly as I could through the underbrush. Finally, I reached the edge of a clearing, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A group of hooded figures stood in a circle around a crude stone altar. Torches lined the clearing, casting dancing shadows that made the scene even more nightmarish. "O Great One, accept this sacrifice," a deep voice intoned from beneath one of the hoods. "With this offering we beseech you to grant us power beyond mortal ken." My eyes widened in horror as I realized what was about to happen. Bound and gagged on the altar was a person. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, struggling weakly against their restraints. "This can't be happening," I breathed, my hand clamping over my mouth to stifle a scream. The leader raised a wicked-looking dagger, its blade glinting in the torchlight. "With this blood we seal our covenant." I couldn't watch anymore. I had to do something, call for help, anything. But as I started to back away, my foot came down on a dry twig. The snap seemed to echo through the forest like a gunshot. The chanting stopped abruptly. I froze, praying that they hadn't heard, that the darkness would conceal me. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a harsh whisper cut through the night. "We are not alone, brothers and sisters. Find the intruder." Panic gripped me as I heard footsteps approaching my hiding spot. I turned to run, but in my haste, I tripped over an exposed root. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I struggled to my feet, a rough hand grabbed my arm. I looked up into the shadowed hood of one of the cultists, his grip like iron as he dragged me towards the clearing. "No, let me go!" I screamed, thrashing wildly. But it was no use. As I was pulled into the torchlight, the leader turned to face me. Though I couldn't see his face, I could feel his malevolent gaze boring into me. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "It seems fate has delivered us a second offering tonight. How fortunate." The last thing I saw before a hood was forced over my head was the terrified eyes of the person on the altar. In that moment, I realized with sickening clarity that I had stumbled into a nightmare from which there might be no awakening. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I stood frozen in place, the horrifying realization of what I'd stumbled upon washing over me like ice water. The hooded figures continued their chanting, seemingly oblivious to my presence for the moment. I knew I had to get out of there and fast. "Okay, Lisa, think," I whispered to myself, barely audible over the blood rushing in my ears. "You need to get out of here without them noticing." I began to back away slowly, my eyes never leaving the grotesque scene before me. Each step felt like an eternity, the leaves and twigs beneath my feet threatening to give away my position with every movement. The chanting grew louder, reaching a fever pitch. I risked a glance over my shoulder, gauging how far I'd come from the clearing. The flickering torchlight was dimmer now, partially obscured by the dense foliage. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe I could make it out of this nightmare after all. Turning back to face the direction I was heading, I nearly jumped out of my skin. A hooded figure stood not 10 feet away, silent and still as a statue. How long had they been there? How had I not noticed them before? "Hello?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, I think I'm lost. I'll just be on my way now." The figure remained motionless, saying nothing. I took another step back, ready to bolt at any moment. "Please," I pleaded. "I didn't see anything. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Suddenly, the figure's head snapped up, revealing a pair of gleaming eyes beneath the hood. "Oh, but you have seen, child," a raspy voice replied, "and now you must join us." I turned to run, but my foot caught on an exposed root. I stumbled, arms windmilling as I fought to keep my balance. In that split second of distraction, I felt a rough hand clamp over my mouth from behind. "Oomph!" I tried to scream, but the sound was muffled by the iron grip. "Shh, shh," the voice behind me soothed, sickeningly sweet. "There's no need for that. You're among friends now." I thrashed wildly, trying to break free, but my captor was too strong. As they dragged me back towards the clearing, panic consumed me. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some sort of nightmare. "Brothers and sisters," the raspy-voiced cultist called out as we entered the torchlit area. "Our Dark Lord has blessed us with another offering." The chanting stopped abruptly and all eyes turned to me. I could feel their gazes boring into me from beneath their hoods, a mixture of curiosity and malevolence that made my skin crawl. The leader stepped forward, his ornate robes rustling with each movement. "Well, well," he mused, his voice smooth and cultured, a stark contrast to the brutality of the scene. "What have we here?" "Please," I begged, my voice cracking with fear. "Let me go. I won't tell anyone about this, I promise." The leader chuckled, a sound devoid of any real mirth. "Oh, my dear," he said, reaching out to caress my cheek with a gloved hand. I flinched away from his touch. "You misunderstand. We have no intention of letting you go. You've been chosen." Tears began to stream down my face as the reality of my situation sank in. "Chosen for what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "For greatness," the leader replied, spreading his arms wide. "For power beyond your wildest dreams. For transcendence." One of the other cultists spoke up, their voice tinged with excitement. "The Dark Lord will be pleased with this one, Master. Her fear is intoxicating." "Indeed," the leader agreed. He turned to address the group. "Prepare her for the ritual. Our Lord's hunger must be satiated." As rough hands grabbed me, pulling me towards the altar, I found my voice again. "No," I screamed, kicking and thrashing with all my might. "You can't do this. Someone help me." But my cries fell on deaf ears. The cultists began to chant once more, their voices rising in a cacophony of dark syllables that seemed to make the very air vibrate. I was thrown to the ground next to the altar, the first victim still bound and whimpering upon it. As I looked into their terrified eyes, I saw my own fear reflected back at me. "Don't worry," I whispered to them, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I'm going to get us out of here." The leader loomed over me, dagger in hand. "Bold words from one so close to death," he sneered. "But I'm afraid your fate is sealed. The only way out is through." As he raised the dagger high, its wicked edge gleaming in the torchlight, I knew I had to act fast. I wasn't going to become another victim in this madman's twisted game. Somehow, some way, I was going to fight back and escape this hell. With determination burning in my chest, I began to formulate a plan. I just hoped I'd have the strength and the luck to see it through. The cold, damp earth pressed against my back as I lay beside the altar, my mind racing with desperate thoughts of escape. The hooded figures loomed over me, their faces hidden in shadow, but I could feel their hungry gazes boring into me. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking with fear. "You don't have to do this. Let us go, and I swear we won't tell anyone what we've seen." The leader stepped forward, his ornate robes rustling with each movement. He knelt beside me, and though I couldn't see his face, I could hear the smile in his voice. "Oh, my dear," he said, his tone sickeningly sweet. "You misunderstand. This isn't something we have to do. It's something we want to do." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Why? Why are you doing this?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Power, of course. The Dark Lord rewards those who serve him faithfully, and tonight you and your friend here will help us ascend to greatness." The other captive, still bound on the altar, let out a muffled whimper. I turned my head to look at them, seeing the same terror in their eyes that I felt in my heart. "Prepare them both," the leader commanded, rising to his feet. Rough hands grabbed me, hauling me up and dragging me towards the altar. I kicked and thrashed, screaming at the top of my lungs, "No! Let me go! Somebody help us!" But my cries echoed uselessly through the dark forest. No help was coming. We were alone. As they lifted me onto the altar next to the other victim, I caught a glimpse of their face in the flickering torchlight. It was a young man, probably no older than me. Tears streaked his dirt-smudged cheeks. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to him as they began to bind my wrists and ankles. "I'll find a way to get us out of this, I promise." He nodded slightly, a faint glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. The cultists stepped back, forming a circle around the altar. The leader approached, dagger in hand, its wicked edge gleaming ominously. "Brothers and sisters," he intoned, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Tonight, we stand on the precipice of greatness. With these sacrifices, we shall open the door to unimaginable power." The cultists began to chant, their voices rising in an eerie, discordant melody that seemed to make the very air vibrate. I pulled frantically at my bonds, but they held fast. The leader raised the dagger high above his head. "O Great One, accept these offerings. Grant us the power to reshape the world in your image." As he brought the blade down, I closed my eyes tightly, bracing for the pain. But suddenly, a commotion erupted among the cultists. "Master," one of them cried out, "something's wrong." I opened my eyes to see the cultists backing away from the altar, fear evident in their postures. The air around us had taken on a strange, shimmering quality, and an unearthly howl echoed through the trees. The leader spun around, his composure cracking. "What's happening? This isn't part of the ritual." A wind whipped up from nowhere, extinguishing the torches and plunging us into darkness. In the chaos, I felt my bonds loosening. Whether by some supernatural force or sheer luck, I didn't know, but I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. I wriggled free, quickly untying the young man next to me. "Come on," I hissed, grabbing his hand. "This is our chance." We slid off the altar, crouching low to avoid detection in the darkness. The cultists were in complete disarray, shouting and stumbling around in confusion. "Which way?" the young man whispered, his voice trembling. I pointed towards where I thought the trees were thickest. "That way. Stay low and quiet." We crept along the edge of the clearing, hearts pounding so loudly I was sure we'd be discovered, but the cultists were too preoccupied with whatever had gone wrong with their ritual to notice us. Just as we reached the tree line, I heard the leader's voice cut through the chaos. "Find them. They must not escape." "Run," I yelled, abandoning all pretense of stealth. We plunged into the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we ran blindly through the darkness. I could hear shouts and footsteps behind us, but fear lent speed to our feet. "Don't stop," I gasped to my companion. "We have to keep going." We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. Finally, when I thought I couldn't take another step, we burst out of the tree line onto a dirt road. "Look," the young man cried, pointing down the road. "Lights!" In the distance, I could see the faint glow of what had to be the town. Safety. We'd made it. But as we started towards the lights, I heard a twig snap behind us. Turning slowly, my heart sank as I saw a lone, hooded figure emerge from the trees. "Did you really think you could escape that easily?" the figure asked, and I recognized the leader's voice. I pushed the young man towards the town. "Run! Get help!" As he took off down the road, I turned to face our pursuer. I was tired, scared, and angry, but I knew I had to buy time for my companion to reach safety. "It's over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your ritual failed, and soon the whole town will know what you've been up to in these woods." The leader laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the night air. "Oh, you naive child. This is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning." As he advanced towards me, I steeled myself for whatever came next. I had escaped death once tonight, and I was determined to do it again. Whatever it took, I would see this through, and make sure these cultists faced justice for their crimes. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would change my life forever. My mind raced as I faced the cult leader, his hooded figure looming menacingly in the moonlight. The young man I'd helped escape was long gone, hopefully reaching the town to get help. Now it was just me and this madman on a deserted dirt road, with the dark, foreboding forest at our backs. "You've caused quite a stir tonight," the leader said, his voice unnervingly calm. "It's not often our sacrifices put up such a spirited fight." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, well, I'm not big on being sacrificed. Call me old-fashioned." He chuckled, the sound sending chills down my spine. "Oh, I do enjoy a bit of spirit. It makes the eventual breaking so much more satisfying." As he spoke, I noticed a gap in the trees to my left. If I could just make it there, I might have a chance to lose him in the woods. "You know," I said, stalling for time, "I've got to ask. Why all this? Human sacrifice? Dark rituals? Seems a bit cliché, don't you think?" The leader took a step forward, and I instinctively backed up. "Cliché?" he spat. "You understand nothing of the power we seek, the cosmic forces we commune with. Our work will reshape this world." "Right," I nodded, inching towards the gap in the trees. "Reshape the world. Got it. And how's that working out for you so far?" His posture stiffened. "You dare mock us? After what you've witnessed tonight?" "Oh, I witnessed something all right," I retorted, surprising myself with my boldness. "I saw a bunch of deluded people in Halloween costumes botch whatever crazy ritual they were attempting. Not exactly world-reshaping stuff." With a snarl of rage, he lunged at me, but I was ready. I ducked under his grasping hands and bolted for the trees. "You can't escape," he roared behind me. "We will find you." I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face as I ran. My heart pounded in my chest, and my lungs burned, but fear and adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear him crashing through the forest behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. ducking under low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. "You're only prolonging the inevitable," his voice echoed through the trees. "Give up now, and your death will be quick." "Not much of a sales pitch," I shouted back, veering sharply to the right to throw him off. As I ran, my mind whirled with questions. How many of them were there? How long had they been doing this? And most pressingly, how the hell was I going to get out of this alive? Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling over rocks and roots before splash into a shallow creek at the bottom. The icy water shocked me back to full alertness, and I scrambled to my feet, soaked and shivering. I paused, listening intently. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. Where was he? I must admit, his voice came from somewhere above me. "You've provided quite the entertaining chase, but playtime is over now." I looked up to see him standing at the top of the embankment, his silhouette stark against the night sky. Panic gripped me as I realized I was trapped. But then, a memory flashed through my mind. The creek. I'd been here before on a hiking trip years ago. If I followed it downstream, it would lead to a series of caves. Without hesitation, I took off running along the creek bed. The water splashed loudly with each step, but I didn't care. Speed was more important than stealth now. "You can't run forever," he called after me. "We have eyes everywhere. There's nowhere you can hide that we won't find you." I ignored his threats, focusing solely on the path ahead. The creek curved sharply to the left, and as I rounded the bend, I saw it, the cave entrance, half hidden behind a curtain of vines. With a final burst of speed, I dove through the vines and into the darkness of the cave. I pressed myself against the cold, damp wall, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Moments later, I heard him splashing along the creek bed. He paused near the cave entrance, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. "This isn't over," he called out, his voice echoing off the rocky walls. "You've seen too much. We will find you, and when we do, you'll beg for the quick death you've rejected tonight." I remained perfectly still until his footsteps faded away. Only then did I allow myself to slide down the cave wall, my legs finally giving out. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had happened hit me. I'd witnessed a murder attempt, been nearly sacrificed myself, and was now hunted by a cult. Tears streamed down my face as I hugged my knees to my chest. But as scared as I was, I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had to get back to town to safety, and more importantly, I had to warn others about what was happening in Darkwood Forest. With shaking hands, I pushed myself back to my feet. "Okay, Lisa," I whispered to myself. "You can do this. One step at a time." And with that, I steeled myself and ventured back out into the night, determined to survive and expose the darkness that lurked in the shadows of my hometown. The cave's darkness enveloped me like a suffocating blanket as I huddled against the damp wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how long I sat there trying to gather my wits and calm my ragged breathing. Every sound, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves outside, made me flinch, certain that the cultists had found me. "Get it together, Lisa," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "You can't stay here forever." Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the protest of my battered muscles. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, praying it had survived my tumble into the creek. A wave of relief washed over me as the screen flickered to life, casting a faint blue glow in the darkness. No signal, of course. I used the phone's light to examine my surroundings. The cave was deeper than I'd initially thought, stretching back into impenetrable darkness. For a moment I considered venturing further in, hoping to find another exit. But the thought of getting lost in an underground labyrinth was even more terrifying than facing what waited outside. "Okay, think," I muttered, trying to formulate a plan. "The town can't be too far. If I can just make it there, I'll be safe." With a deep breath, I crept towards the cave entrance, parting the curtain of vines with trembling hands. The forest beyond was silent and still, bathed in pale moonlight. No sign of the cultists. I stepped out cautiously, every sense on high alert. The creek gurgled softly to my right, and I decided to follow it downstream. Water always led to civilization, right? As I picked my way along the rocky bank, the events of the night replayed in my mind. The hooded figures, the altar, the failed ritual. It all seemed like a nightmare. But the ache in my muscles and the chill of my damp clothes were stark reminders that this was all too real. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, and I froze. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. What if it was one of them? No response came, but the forest suddenly felt alive with unseen presences. I quickened my pace, no longer caring about stealth. I had to get out of these woods. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to snag me. My foot caught on an exposed root and I stumbled, barely catching myself before I fell face first into the creek. Come on, I urged myself, pushing forward. You're almost there. You have to be. Just then, I spotted a faint glow through the trees. Streetlights. The edge of town couldn't be far now. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I broke into a run, ignoring the protests of my tired legs. The light grew brighter, and I could make out the silhouettes of buildings. I was going to make it. As I burst out of the tree line, I found myself on the outskirts of town. The familiar sight of houses and streetlights nearly brought me to tears. I was safe. I'd escaped. But my relief was short-lived. "There she is!" a voice shouted from down the street. I turned to see two hooded figures emerging from between houses, pointing in my direction. "No, no, no!" I gasped, my newfound safety crumbling around me. How had they found me so quickly? I took off running down the street, my sneakers pounding against the asphalt. "Help!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the silent houses. "Somebody help me!" But no lights came on. No doors opened. It was as if the entire town was deserted. Or worse, complicit. I rounded a corner and spotted the police station at the end of the block. If I could just make it there, surely I'd be safe. They'd have to believe me now with the cultists in hot pursuit. "Almost there," I panted, pushing myself to run faster than I ever had before. I reached the station steps and practically threw myself at the front door, yanking it open and stumbling inside. "Help!" I cried out to the officer behind the desk. "Please, you have to help me. They're after me." The officer looked up slowly, his face impassive. "Who's after you, miss?" "The cult," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "In the forest, they tried to kill me. They're right behind me." He raised an eyebrow, looking past me to the door. "I don't see anyone, miss." I spun around, expecting to see my pursuers bursting through the door, but the street beyond was empty and still. "But they were right there," I said, confusion and doubt creeping into my voice. The officer sighed, standing up from his desk. "Why don't you come with me, miss? We'll get this all sorted out." As he led me deeper into the station, a chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. The officer's calm demeanor, the empty streets, the cultists' sudden disappearance, it all felt wrong. I realized with growing horror that my ordeal was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as I sat in a hard plastic chair, my clothes still damp and my nerves frayed. Officer Jenkins, a middle-aged man with a skeptical frown, sat across from me, his pen poised over a notepad. "So, Miss Monroe," he began, his tone indicating he'd rather be anywhere else. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I was hiking in Darkwood Forest when I stumbled upon a group of people performing some kind of ritual. They were going to sacrifice someone, and when they saw me, they tried to sacrifice me too. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "A ritual sacrifice in Darkwood Forest?" "I know how it sounds," I said, leaning forward, "but I swear it's true. There were hooded figures, an altar, everything. They chased me through the woods." The officer sighed, putting down his pen. Miss Monroe, do you realize how fantastical this sounds? We get a lot of stories about Darkwood, kids trying to scare each other mostly. But ritual sacrifice? That's a new one. Frustration bubbled up inside me. I'm not making this up. There's a cult operating in those woods and they're dangerous. You have to believe me. Calm down, Miss Monroe, Jenkins said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. Why don't we start with something simpler? Had you been drinking tonight, or perhaps taking any substances? I gaped at him, incredulous. What? No, I was completely sober. This really happened. Just then there was a knock at the door. Another officer poked his head in. Jenkins, there's someone here to see Miss Monroe. Relief washed over me. It had to be the young man I'd helped escape. He could corroborate my story. But as the door opened wider, my heart sank. Standing there, looking concerned and disappointed, were my parents. Lisa, my mother cried, rushing to embrace me. We were so worried when the police called. What's going on? I pulled away from her hug, looking between her and my father. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? My father stepped forward, his brow furrowed. The police called us, said you'd come in with some wild story about cults in the forest. Lisa, what's gotten into you? It's not a wild story, I protested, my voice rising. It really happened. I saw it with my own eyes. Officer Jenkins cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, perhaps it would be best if you took Lisa home. She's had a difficult night. No, I shouted, jumping to my feet. You can't just dismiss this. People's lives are in danger. My father put a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. Lisa, that's enough. We're going home now. As they led me out of the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Why weren't they listening to me? Why hadn't the other escaped victim come forward? The car ride home was tense and silent. I stared out the window, my mind racing. The familiar streets of our small town now seemed sinister, hiding dark secrets behind closed doors and drawn curtains. When we arrived home, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with worry. Sweetheart, maybe you should get some rest. We can talk about this in the morning. There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. I know what I saw. I trudged up to my room, closing the door behind me. As soon as I was alone, I collapsed onto my bed, the events of the night crashing over me like a tidal wave. Tears of frustration and fear streamed down my face. After a few minutes, I sat up, wiping my eyes. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. If the police wouldn't believe me, I'd have to find proof on my own. I moved to my desk, booting up my old laptop. As I waited for it to start, I caught a glimpse of movement outside my window. A hooded figure stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring directly at my house. My blood ran cold. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Had I imagined it? The laptop chimed as it finished starting up. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Whether the figure was real or not, one thing was certain. I couldn't trust anyone in this town. Not the police, not my neighbors, maybe not even my own parents. As I opened a new document and began typing out everything I could remember about the cult and their ritual, a grim determination settled over me. I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Because if I didn't, who would? Little did I know, my quest for answers would lead me down a dark path, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my town, my loved ones, and even myself. The days following my encounter in Darkwood Forest blurred together in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow seemed to hide a hooded figure. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I'd taken to keeping my curtains drawn at all times, peering out through tiny gaps to scan the street for any sign of cult activity. On the third day, as I sat at my desk, obsessively scrolling through local news sites for any hint of mysterious happenings, a soft knock on my bedroom door nearly made me fall out of my chair. Lisa? My mom's voice came through the door. Honey, can I come in? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the laptop's lid. Just a second, I called, quickly closing my research tabs before saying, "Okay, come in." My mom entered, her face etched with worry. She sat on the edge of my bed, patting the spot next to her. "Come here, sweetie. Let's talk." Reluctantly, I joined her, maintaining a careful distance. She sighed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I flinched involuntarily. "Lisa," she began, her voice gentle. "Your father and I are really worried about you. You've barely left your room since that night. Don't you think it's time to put this behind you?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Put it behind me? Mom, I saw people trying to commit murder. How am I supposed to just forget that?" She shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "Honey, I know you think you saw something in those woods, but, well, Darkwood has always been full of stories. Maybe you just got scared and your imagination ran wild." "It wasn't my imagination," I snapped, standing up and pacing the room. "Why won't anyone believe me? There's something evil happening in this town and everyone's just ignoring it." My mom stood, reaching out to me, but I backed away. "Lisa, please. We're just trying to help. Maybe we should consider talking to Dr. Simmons again. He helped you so much after your accident last year." I froze, a chill running down my spine. What does my accident have to do with this? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Well, sweetie, sometimes when we've been through trauma, our minds can play tricks on us, make us see things that aren't really there." "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know what I saw." Just then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I lunged for it, grateful for the distraction. It was a text from my best friend, Jess. "Hey, haven't heard from you in days. You okay? Want to meet up at the grind?" I looked up at my mom, who was watching me with a mixture of concern and hope. "It's Jess," I said. "She wants to meet for coffee." My mom's face lit up. "Oh, that's wonderful. You should go, get some fresh air. It'll do you good to get out of the house." I hesitated. On one hand, the thought of leaving the relative safety of my room terrified me, but on the other, maybe Jess would believe me, and I desperately needed an ally. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll go." 20 minutes later, I found myself walking down Main Street, my eyes darting nervously from side to side. The Grind, our local coffee shop, was just ahead. As I approached, I saw Jess waving at me through the window. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the safety of the cafe. But just as I was about to grab the door handle, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, partially hidden in an alley, stood a hooded figure. They were perfectly still, facing directly towards me. I blinked, and they were gone. "Lisa." Jess's voice snapped me back to reality. She had opened the door and was looking at me with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, sorry, just lost in thought. Let's go in." As we sat down with our coffees, Jess leaned forward, her eyes searching my face. "Okay, spill. What's going on with you? You've been MIA for days, and now you look like you're about to jump out of your skin." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Could I trust Jess? Would she believe me when no one else had? "Jess," I began, my voice low. "If I tell you something crazy, do you promise to hear me out? To really listen?" She nodded, her expression serious. "Of course. You're my best friend. You can tell me anything." And so, with shaking hands wrapped around my coffee mug, I began to recount the events of that terrifying night in Darkwood Forest. As I spoke, Jess's eyes widened, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence. Finally, Jess spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lisa, that's insane. Are you sure?" "I knew you wouldn't believe me," I cut her off, slumping back in my chair. "Nobody does." Jess reached across the table, grabbing my hand. Hey, I didn't say I don't believe you. It's a lot to take in. But I know you, Lisa. You're not the type to make up stories or hallucinate. If you say this happened, then, well, I believe you. Relief washed over me, bringing tears to my eyes. Really? She nodded, squeezing my hand. Really? So what do we do now? How can I help? For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. With Jess by my side, maybe we could uncover the truth and expose the darkness lurking in our town. As we bent our heads together, starting to formulate a plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. But this time, instead of paralyzing me with fear, it strengthened my resolve. The cult might be powerful, but they weren't invincible. And now, they had two determined enemies instead of one. Little did I know, our amateur investigation was about to uncover secrets far darker and more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face as I hunched over it, eyes scanning frantically through pages of occult symbols and ritualistic practices. It had been a week since my coffee shop meeting with Jess, and we'd thrown ourselves headfirst into investigating the cult. A gentle knock on my bedroom door made me jump. "Lisa," Jess's voice called softly. "Your mom let me in. Can I come in?" I quickly minimized my browser windows. "Yeah, come in," I replied, trying to sound casual. Jess entered, her arms full of old newspapers and printouts. She dumped them on my bed with a sigh. "I think I'm going cross-eyed from all this research," she said, flopping down next to the pile. I spun my chair to face her. "Find anything useful?" She shrugged, picking up a newspaper. "Maybe. I've been going through old issues of the Darkwood Gazette. Did you know there have been an unusually high number of missing persons cases in this area over the past few decades?" My eyes widened. "Really? How many?" "At least one or two every year," Jess replied, flipping through the pages. Most of them were written off as runaways or accidents in the forest, but I don't know, it seems suspicious now. I nodded, a chill running down my spine. It fits the pattern. The cult needs sacrifices, right? They can't all be outsiders like me who stumble upon them. Jess looked up at me, her face pale. "Lisa, do you really think they've been doing this for years? Right under everyone's noses?" Before I could answer, my laptop pinged with a new email notification. I turned back to the screen, curious. "That's weird," I muttered. "What is it?" Jess asked, coming to look over my shoulder. "An email from an address I don't recognize. The subject line just says, Darkwood Truth." Jess gripped my shoulder. "Should you open it? What if it's them? What if they know what we're doing?" I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the email. But what if it's someone who can help us? We need all the information we can get. Taking a deep breath, I clicked on the email. A single line of text appeared. "If you want the truth about Darkwood, meet me at the old Miller farm at midnight. Come alone." Jess and I exchanged worried glances. "Lisa, you can't go," she said firmly. "It's obviously a trap." I stood up, pacing the room. But what if it's not? What if this is our chance to get some real answers? "And what if it's the cult luring you out to finish what they started?" Jess countered. "It's too dangerous." I stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Jess, we've been at this for a week and we've got nothing concrete, just rumors and suspicions. If there's even a chance this person knows something, I have to take it." Jess sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know that look. You're going no matter what I say, aren't you?" I nodded, a determined set to my jaw. "Fine," she conceded, "but I'm coming with you." The email said to come alone, I reminded her. "Yeah, well, tough luck. I'm not letting you walk into a potential death trap by yourself. I'll hide nearby, ready to call for help if anything goes wrong." Relief washed over me. As scared as I was, knowing Jess had my back made me feel braver. "Okay," I agreed, "but be careful. If this is the cult, they're dangerous." As night fell, Jess and I made our way to the outskirts of town where the abandoned Miller farm stood. The old farmhouse loomed before us, its windows dark and empty like soulless eyes. "I don't like this, Lisa," Jess whispered as we approached. "It feels wrong." I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. "I know, but we're here now. You stay hidden in those bushes over there. If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, call the police." Jess nodded, squeezing my hand before disappearing into the shadows. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the farmhouse's porch. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight. As the clock struck midnight, the front door slowly creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm here about the email, about the truth of Darkwood." The figure stepped forward into the dim moonlight. It was an old man, his face weathered and lined. He looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. "I was hoping you wouldn't come," he said softly. "But now that you're here, there's no turning back. The truth you seek, it's far darker than you can imagine." As I stepped forward to hear what he had to say, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a threshold from which there was no return. Whatever I was about to learn would change everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But I had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, I followed the old man into the darkness of the farmhouse, ready to face whatever truths awaited me. The interior of the old Miller farmhouse was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the dilapidated room. The old man gestured for me to sit in a threadbare armchair while he lowered himself into a creaking rocking chair opposite me. "Before we begin," he said, his voice gravelly with age, "I need to know. Are you sure you want to hear this? Once you know the truth, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I'm sure. I need to know what's really going on in Darkwood." He nodded solemnly. "Very well. My name is Harold Miller. Yes, that Miller. This was my family's farm for generations until everything changed." "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harold's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "It was 1952. I was just a boy then. My father discovered something on our land, an ancient stone altar hidden deep in the woods. He thought it was an interesting historical artifact, nothing more. But then the dream started." A chill ran down my spine. "Dreams? Terrible dreams," Harold continued. "Visions of cosmic horrors beyond human comprehension. My father became obsessed, spending days and nights in the woods. And then one night he sacrificed my mother on that altar." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "Oh my God." Harold's eyes refocused on me, filled with a pain that 7 decades hadn't diminished. "That was the beginning. The cult grew from there, spreading through the town like a cancer. They believe that through sacrifice, they can gain unimaginable power and reshape reality itself." "But how has no one stopped them?" I asked, my mind reeling. "How has this been going on for so long?" "Because, my dear, the cult isn't just a few crazed individuals," Harold said gravely. "It's deeply rooted in every aspect of our town. Police, government, business leaders. Many are either cult members or under their influence." My blood ran cold as I remembered the dismissive police officer and my parents' strange behavior. "No," I whispered. "It can't be." Harold leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "I'm afraid it is. And now that you've started digging, you're in terrible danger. They won't stop until..." Suddenly, a loud crash came from outside, followed by a muffled scream. My heart leaped into my throat. "Jess!" I cried, jumping to my feet. Harold's face paled. "You didn't come alone?" I ran to the window, peering out into the darkness. To my horror, I saw 2 hooded figures dragging a struggling Jess towards a waiting van. "No!" I shouted, turning to run outside. But Harold caught my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for his age. "Wait!" he hissed. "You can't help her if you're caught too." There's a hidden cellar under this house. Go there now. But Jess, I'll stall them, Harold insisted, pushing me towards a faded rug. Pull that up. There's a trap door. Go, now. With shaking hands, I pulled back the rug, revealing a wooden trapdoor. I could hear voices approaching the house. With one last desperate look at Harold, I opened the trapdoor and descended into darkness, pulling it closed above me. I huddled in the musty cellar, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. Above me, I could hear muffled voices. "Where is she, old man?" a gruff voice demanded. "Who?" Harold's voice replied innocently. "I'm just an old fool who likes his solitude. No one here but me." "Don't play games," another voice snarled. "We know she came here. Where is she hiding?" "Search all you want," Harold said calmly. "You'll find no one." I heard the sounds of furniture being overturned, doors being slammed open. Footsteps crossed back and forth over my head, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find the trapdoor. After what felt like an eternity, the noises subsided. "He's telling the truth," one voice said. "She's not here. She must have run off when we grabbed her friend." "Fine," the other voice growled. "But we're watching you, old man. If we find out you've helped her..." The threat hung in the air, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps and a slamming door. Still, I didn't dare move, afraid it might be a trick. Several minutes later, the trapdoor creaked open. Harold's face appeared, lined with worry. "They're gone," he whispered. "For now." I climbed out of the cellar on shaky legs. "Jess," I choked out. "They took Jess. What are they going to do to her?" Harold's expression was grim. "Nothing good, I'm afraid. But if she's still alive, there's only one place they would take her." "Where?" I demanded. "The heart of their power," Harold replied. "The place where it all began. The hidden altar in Darkwood Forest." I straightened up, a fierce determination cutting through my fear. "Then that's where I'm going. I'm going to save Jess and put an end to this once and for all." Harold nodded, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "You're braver than you know, child, but you can't face them alone. You'll need help." "Who?" I asked. "You said the whole town is under their influence." A small, mysterious smile crossed Harold's face. "Not the whole town. There are others who resist, who fight from the shadows. It's time you met the resistance." As I followed Harold out of the farmhouse and into the night, I knew I was crossing a point of no return. The quest to save my best friend would lead me into the very heart of the darkness that had plagued Darkwood for generations. But I was ready. No matter the cost, I would bring down this cult and free our town from its evil grip. Little did I know, the true extent of the horror I would face was beyond anything I could have imagined. The cool night air whipped around us as Harold's ancient pickup truck rumbled down a narrow, overgrown road. My mind raced with thoughts of Jess, imagining the horrors she might be facing. I clenched my fists, willing the truck to go faster. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, breaking the tense silence. Harold's eyes remained fixed on the road. "To meet the others. People who, like me, have lost loved ones to the cult. We've been working in secret for years, trying to gather evidence and find a way to stop them." As we rounded a bend, an old, dilapidated barn came into view. Harold pulled up beside it and cut the engine. "We're here," he said softly. "Remember, these people have risked everything to fight the cult. Trust doesn't come easy for them." We approached the barn, and Harold knocked on the door in a specific pattern. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing a stern-faced woman with graying hair. "Harold?" She nodded, then turned her piercing gaze to me. "This is her?" "Yes, Martha, this is Lisa. She's seen them, escaped them, and now they have her friend." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Come in, quickly." Inside, the barn was a hive of activity. Maps covered the walls, strings connecting various locations and photos. A group of people huddled around a table, deep in discussion. They all looked up as we entered. "Everyone," Harold announced, This is Lisa. She's going to help us bring down the cult once and for all. A man with a scarred face stepped forward. Help us? She's just a kid. She'll get us all killed. I felt anger bubbling up inside me. I'm not just a kid, I snapped. I've seen what they do. I escaped them. And now they have my best friend. I'm not stopping until I save her and end this nightmare. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Then slowly, Martha began to clap. Well said, girl. You've got fire. We'll need that. Over the next hour, I learned about the resistance. They'd been working for years, piecing together the cult's history, tracking their movements and trying to protect potential victims. But they'd never been able to gather enough evidence to bring the cult down for good. The problem is the altar, explained a younger man named Rick. It's the source of their power. As long as it exists, they'll always be able to recruit new members and continue their sacrifices. Then we destroy it, I said firmly. The scarred man, whose name I learned was Tom, shook his head. It's not that simple. The altar is protected by powerful magic. We've tried to destroy it before, but... His voice trailed off, and I saw pain flash across several faces in the room. I realized they'd lost people in previous attempts. There has to be a way, I insisted. And we have to find it fast. They have Jess, and I don't know how long. I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of what might be happening to Jess was too horrifying to put into words. Martha placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We'll find a way, dear. But first, we need to know exactly what you saw in the forest. Every detail could be important. I took a deep breath and recounted everything I could remember about that terrifying night. As I spoke, Rick furiously took notes, while others compared my story to their own experiences. When I finished, an excited murmur ran through the group. The ritual you interrupted, Harold said, his eyes gleaming. It wasn't just any sacrifice. From what you've described, it sounds like they were attempting a major summoning. Summoning what? I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. An entity, Tom replied grimly. Something ancient and powerful. If they had succeeded... But they didn't, Martha interjected. Thanks to Lisa, they failed, and that failure might be the key to bringing them down. Rick nodded enthusiastically. If we could force them to attempt the summoning again, but sabotage it at the crucial moment, it might create a backlash powerful enough to destroy the altar. Hope surged through me. So we have a plan? We have the beginnings of one, Harold cautioned, but it's incredibly dangerous. If anything goes wrong, we could unleash something far worse than the cult. I stood up, my resolve hardening. I don't care about the danger. Jess risked everything to help me, and now she's paying the price. I'm going to save her and end this, whatever it takes. The room fell silent again, but this time I saw respect in the eyes looking back at me. All right then, Martha said, a hint of a smile on her face. Let's get to work. We've got a cult to destroy and a town to save. As the group began to plan in earnest, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. With these people by my side, we had a chance to save Jess and free Darkwood from the cult's grip once and for all. Little did I know the true test of our resolve was yet to come, and the sacrifices required would be greater than any of us could have imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of frantic planning and preparation. The Resistance had set up a makeshift command center in the old barn, with maps, diagrams, and timelines covering every available surface. I threw myself into the work, desperate to keep my mind off the horrors Jess might be facing. On the third day, as the sun began to set, Martha called us all together. It's time, she said, her voice grave. We've pinpointed the location of the altar and tracked the cult's movements. They're planning another ritual tonight. My heart raced. Then we have to move now, I insisted. Harold nodded. Lisa's right. This might be our only chance to save Jess and stop the cult for good. We gathered our equipment, flashlights, walkie-talkies, and a few makeshift weapons. As we prepared to leave, Tom pulled me aside. "Listen, kid," he said, his scarred face etched with concern. "I know you're determined to save your friend, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture. If things go south, our priority has to be destroying that altar. Understand?" I wanted to argue, to insist that saving Jess was just as important, but I saw the pain in Tom's eyes and realized he must have faced a similar choice in the past. I nodded silently. We piled into several vehicles and set off towards the heart of Darkwood Forest. As we drove, Martha went over the plan one last time. "Rick and his team will create a diversion on the east side of the ritual site," she explained. "While the cult is distracted, Lisa, Harold, and I will sneak in from the west. Tom's group will be our backup, ready to intervene if things go wrong." "And once we're in?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "We find Jess and any other captives," Harold said. "Then when the moment is right, we disrupt their ritual and destroy the altar." The forest loomed before us, dark and forbidding. We parked the vehicles and continued on foot, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. As we got closer to the ritual site, I could hear chanting in the distance. Suddenly, Martha held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "Look," she whispered, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could see flickering firelight. Hooded figures moved around a clearing, and in the center stood the stone altar. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Jess tied to a post near the altar, along with several other terrified-looking people. "Okay," Martha breathed. "Rick's team should be in position. Any moment now." A series of explosions rocked the night, followed by shouts of confusion from the cultists. Many of them ran towards the source of the noise, leaving the ritual site less guarded. "Now," Harold hissed. We sprinted towards the clearing. As we burst through the tree line, I locked eyes with Jess. Her face was bruised and tear-stained, but her eyes widened with hope when she saw me. "Lisa!" she cried out. One of the remaining cultists turned towards us, raising a wicked-looking knife. "Intruders!" he shouted. "Protect the altar!" Everything descended into chaos. Martha and Harold engaged the cultists, while I ran towards Jess. I fumbled with the ropes binding her, my hands shaking. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed as I worked. "This is all my fault." Jess shook her head. "You came for me. That's all that matters." As I freed Jess and the other captives, more cultists began to return to the clearing. Tom and his group joined the fray, but we were quickly becoming outnumbered. "Lisa!" Harold shouted over the noise of the battle. "The altar! We have to destroy it now!" I looked at the stone structure, its surface covered in arcane symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the firelight. Then I saw the cult leader approaching it, a black obsidian dagger in his hand. "No," I screamed, realizing what he was about to do. Time seemed to slow as I sprinted towards the altar. The cult leader began to chant, his voice growing in power with each word. The symbols on the altar began to glow with an otherworldly light. I reached the altar just as the leader raised the dagger. Without thinking, I threw myself between him and the stone surface. The dagger plunged down, and I felt a searing pain in my shoulder. But something strange happened. As my blood touched the altar, the glowing symbols flared brilliantly, then began to crack. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing in intensity. "What have you done?" the cult leader shrieked, his face contorted with fury and fear. The whine became a roar. The altar shuddered, cracks spreading across its surface. I stumbled back, clutching my wounded shoulder, as the stone structure exploded in a blinding flash of light. When my vision cleared, the altar was gone. In its place was a smoking crater. The cultists lay scattered on the ground, many unconscious, others staring in disbelief. Jess ran to me, supporting me as my legs threatened to give way. "Lisa, oh God, you're hurt." I managed a weak smile. "We did it," I whispered. "It's over." As sirens wailed in the distance and the resistance members began to secure the scene, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had truly won. But as my gaze met Harold's across the clearing, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The altar was destroyed. the cult's power broken. But had we truly seen the last of the darkness that had plagued Darkwood for so long? Only time would tell. For now, as the adrenaline faded and the pain in my shoulder intensified, I was content to know that Jess was safe and that we had struck a mighty blow against the evil that had threatened our town. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The aftermath of the ritual site battle was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. As the local police, those not involved with the cult, arrived on the scene, I found myself being ushered into an ambulance, Jess's hand clasped tightly in mine. "You're not leaving me," she said firmly, her voice hoarse but determined. I managed a weak smile, the pain in my shoulder intensifying. Wouldn't dream of it. At the hospital, doctors treated my wound while Jess hovered nearby, refusing to leave my side. As they stitched me up, Detective Sarah Chen entered the room, her face a mix of concern and determination. "Lisa," she said softly, "I know you've been through a lot, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." I glanced at Jess, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, I recounted the events of the past few days, discovering the cult, meeting Harold and the Resistance, and the final confrontation at the altar. Detective Chen listened intently, her expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. When I finished, she let out a long sigh. "I've lived in Darkwood my entire life," she said, shaking her head. "I never imagined. The scale of this conspiracy is staggering." "What happens now?" Jess asked, her voice small. "Now," Detective Chen replied, straightening up, "we start cleaning house. Many arrests have already been made, and there will be more to come. The cult's influence ran deep, but with your testimony and the evidence gathered by the Resistance, we can finally root out this evil." As she turned to leave, I called out, "Wait, what about my parents? Are they—" Detective Chen's expression softened. "Your parents are safe, Lisa. They were under the cult's influence, but not willing participants. With the altar destroyed, the hold over them and many others seems to have broken." Relief washed over me, and I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Jess squeezed my hand, offering silent support. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police interviews, news reports, and a town struggling to come to terms with the darkness that had lurked beneath its surface for so long. Darkwood became the center of a national media frenzy, with reporters swarming the town, eager for any scrap of information about the cult and its downfall. Through it all, Jess remained by my side, her presence a constant comfort. We spent long hours talking, processing the trauma we'd experienced and marveling at how our lives had changed. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a month after the events at the altar, Jess and I decided to visit Harold at his farm. As we approached the old house, we saw him sitting on the porch, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. "Ah, our young heroes," he said with a warm smile as we climbed the steps. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at my healing shoulder. "Taking it day by day. How about you? How are the others?" Harold's expression grew somber. "We're adjusting. It's strange, you know. We spent so long fighting in the shadows, and now we're trying to figure out how to live in the light." Jess leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Do you think it's really over? The cult, I mean." Harold was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the forest on the horizon. "The cult as we knew it is finished," he said slowly. "But evil has a way of finding new forms. We must remain vigilant." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm sunlight. "What do you mean?" Harold turned back to us, his eyes intense. The altar was a focal point, a conduit for dark energies, but those energies didn't simply disappear when the altar was destroyed. They're still out there seeking a new vessel. "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling a familiar mix of fear and determination rising within me. "We watch," Harold replied. "We learn. And if the darkness rises again, we'll be ready to face it." As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the farm, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the faintest whisper of an unearthly sound. Jess and I exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between us. "Whatever comes next," Jess said, reaching for my hand. "We face it together." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Together," I echoed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, I couldn't shake the feeling that our battle against the darkness was far from over. The cult may have been defeated, but something told me that Darkwood's mysteries were only beginning to unfold. Harold seemed to sense my thoughts. "You two have shown remarkable courage," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But remember, the greatest weapon against the darkness is not just bravery, but knowledge. Study the old texts, learn the town's true history. For in understanding the past, we may find the key to safeguarding the future." As Jess and I left the farm that evening, walking hand in hand down the quiet country road, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear of what might lie ahead, but also a sense of purpose and determination. Whatever darkness still lurked in Darkwood, whatever ancient evils might seek to rise again, we would be ready. The last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that belied the shadows we now knew existed beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic town. But as I looked at Jess, saw the strength and resolve in her eyes, I knew that together, we could face whatever came next. The story of Darkwood was far from over. In fact, I had a feeling it was just beginning. The crisp autumn air gave way to winter's chill as life in Darkwood settled into an uneasy new normal. The town was quieter now, its secrets laid bare, but an undercurrent of tension remained. As the first snow fell, blanketing the town in white, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were merely in the eye of the storm. One frigid December morning, I awoke to an urgent text from Jess. "Meet me at the library ASAP. Found something." My heart raced as I threw on warm clothes and rushed out the door. The streets were nearly empty, most residents choosing to stay indoors to escape the biting cold. As I approached the library, I saw Jess pacing outside, her breath forming small clouds in the air. "Lisa," she called as I jogged up. "Thank God you're here. You're not going to believe this." Inside, Jess led me to a secluded corner, where she had spread out several old books and papers. Her eyes were wide with excitement and a hint of fear. "Remember what Harold said about studying the town's history?" she said in a hushed voice. "Well, I've been doing some digging, and I found this." She pointed to an ancient leather-bound tome. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in spidery handwriting and strange symbols. "It's a journal," Jess explained, "written by one of Darkwood's founders in the late 1600s, and Lisa, it mentions the cult. Not by name, but it's clear that's what it's talking about." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the faded text. "But that's impossible," I whispered. "The cult couldn't have been around that long. Could it?" Jess shook her head. "That's not even the craziest part. Look at this passage." She flipped to a dog-eared page and read aloud. "The stone speaks to me in dreams, promising power beyond mortal ken. But I fear the price it asks is too great. The barrier between worlds grows thin, and I sense a presence vast and terrible seeking entry." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. The stone, could that be the altar? "I think so," Jess nodded. "But if that's true, then destroying it might not have been enough. Whatever was trying to come through, it might still be out there." As if in response to her words, the lights in the library flickered ominously. We both jumped, then laughed nervously at our own skittishness. "We need to tell Harold about this," I said, gathering up the books. "He might know." I was cut off by a loud crash from the front of the library. We rushed to investigate and found the librarian, Mrs. Watkins, lying unconscious on the floor, a broken mug of coffee spilled beside her. "Mrs. Watkins," I cried, kneeling beside her. To my relief, she was breathing, but her skin was clammy and pale. Jess was already on her phone calling for an ambulance. As we waited, I noticed something odd about Mrs. Watkins' appearance. Dark veins were visible beneath her skin, pulsing with an unnatural faint glow. "Jess," I said slowly, Look at this. Does this remind you of anything? Jess's eyes widened as she saw what I was pointing at. The cultists, she whispered. Right before the altar exploded, some of them looked like this. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. As paramedics rushed in and began tending to Mrs. Watkins, Jess and I slipped out, our minds reeling from what we'd discovered. We need to gather the others, I said as we hurried down the snowy street. If the cult's influence is somehow returning, we have to stop it before it spreads. Jess nodded grimly. I'll call Harold and the Resistance. You get Detective Chen. We need to move fast. As we parted ways, the wind picked up, howling through the bare trees like a mournful cry. I pulled my coat tighter around me, trying to shake off the feeling that unseen eyes were watching from every shadow. That evening, we gathered at Harold's farm. The old barn, once a secret resistance hideout, now served as our war room. Maps of Darkwood covered the walls, with red strings connecting various locations where strange incidents had been reported over the past few weeks. It's happening all over town, Detective Chen said, her voice tight with worry. Unexplained illnesses, people reporting strange dreams, even sightings of, well, things that shouldn't exist. Harold nodded gravely. The destruction of the altar released energies we don't fully understand. It seems those energies are seeking new vessels, new ways to manifest. But how do we stop it? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. We can't just destroy another altar, we don't even know where to start. The room fell silent, the weight of our predicament hanging heavy in the air. Then, unexpectedly, Tom spoke up. Maybe, he said slowly. We've been looking at this all wrong. We've been trying to fight the darkness, to destroy it. But what if we need to understand it instead? All eyes turned to Tom, surprise and skepticism evident on many faces. Explain, Harold said, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. Tom took a deep breath. The journal Lisa and Jess found, it speaks of a barrier between worlds. What if that barrier is key? Not destroying the darkness, but sealing it away properly this time? A murmur ran through the group as people considered this new perspective. I caught Jess's eye, seeing my own mix of hope and apprehension reflected there. It's dangerous, Harold warned. Seeking to understand these forces could easily lead to corruption. But it might be our only choice, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. We can't keep reacting. We need to get ahead of this, or Darkwood might not survive what's coming. As the discussion continued late into the night, snow began to fall outside, covering the world in a deceptive blanket of peace. But within the barn, we planned and prepared, knowing that the true battle for Darkwood's soul was only just beginning. Little did we know, the choices we would make in the coming days would not only determine the fate of our town, but potentially the very fabric of reality itself. The following weeks were a blur of research and preparation. We divided into teams, each focusing on a different aspect of the growing crisis in Darkwood. Jess and I spent countless hours in the library, poring over ancient texts and piecing together the town's hidden history. One chilly January afternoon, as we huddled over a stack of dusty tomes, Jess suddenly gasped. "Lisa, look at this." I leaned in, squinting at the faded text. It was a passage from an old settler's diary, dated 1692. The standing stones in the deep wood pulse with an otherworldly light. The elders speak of a ritual to seal away the darkness, but warn that the price may be too great. They say a willing sacrifice is needed, a soul pure enough to strengthen the barrier between worlds. A chill ran down my spine. A willing sacrifice? That sounds ominously familiar. Jess nodded grimly. The cult must have twisted this knowledge for their own purposes. Instead of sealing the darkness, they were trying to harness it. But where are these standing stones now? I wondered aloud. I've never heard of anything like that in Darkwood Forest. Our questions were interrupted by the arrival of Detective Chen, her face tight with worry. "We've got trouble," she said in a low voice. 3 more people have fallen into comas, just like Mrs. Watkins. And there are reports of strange lights in the forest. We quickly gathered the rest of our group at Harold's farm. As we shared our findings and Detective Chen's report, a tense silence fell over the room. Harold was the first to break it. "The standing stones," he mused, stroking his chin. "I've heard whispers of them, but their location was lost to time, or so I thought." Tom leaned forward, his scarred face etched with determination. "We need to find them. If they're the key to sealing away this darkness, it's our best shot at saving the town." "But what about the sacrifice?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't just offer up an innocent person." I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "We won't," I declared. "There has to be another way. We've come too far and fought too hard to resort to the cult's methods now." Harold nodded approvingly. "Well said, Lisa. But finding an alternative won't be easy. We're dealing with forces beyond our comprehension." "Then we'd better start comprehending them," I replied. "Jess and I will keep digging through the old records. Tom, can you and your team start scouting the forest for any signs of these standing stones?" Tom nodded, already reaching for his coat. "We'll start at first light tomorrow." As the meeting broke up and people began to file out, Detective Chen pulled me aside. "Lisa, there's something else you should know," she said, her voice low. "Your parents, they've been asking questions, difficult questions. I think they're starting to remember things from when they were under the cult's influence." My heart sank. I'd been avoiding my parents, unsure of how to face them after everything that had happened. "What kind of questions?" "About the ritual sites mostly," Chen replied. "And about you. They're worried, Lisa. They know you're involved in something dangerous." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'll talk to them. They deserve to know the truth." The next day, after a restless night filled with unsettling dreams, I made my way to my parents' house. As I approached the front door, I could see them watching me through the window, their faces a mix of concern and relief. "Lisa," my mother breathed as she opened the door, pulling me into a tight hug. "We've been so worried." My father stood behind her, his expression guarded but his eyes filled with a pain that made my heart ache. "I think it's time we talked," he said quietly. Really talked. For the next few hours we sat in the living room as I recounted everything that had happened since that fateful night in the forest. My parents listened in stunned silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their own guilt and confusion. "We knew something was wrong," my father said when I finished, his voice hoarse. "But it was like we were trapped in a fog, unable to see clearly or act on our own. The cult's influence was strong," I reassured them. "But it's broken now. You're free." My mother reached out, taking my hand in hers. "But at what cost, Lisa? You've been through so much, faced such danger, and now you're planning to face it again, aren't you?" I nodded, squeezing her hand. "I have to, Mom. Darkwood is still in danger. If we don't stop this darkness, everything we've fought for will have been for nothing." My father stood up, pacing the room. "Then let us help," he said firmly. "We may not remember everything from our time under the cult's control, but we might know things that could be useful. And we want to make amends." As I looked at my parents, seeing the determination in their eyes, I felt a surge of emotion. Despite everything we'd been through, despite the wedge the cult had driven between us, we were still a family. And maybe, just maybe, that bond could be a source of strength in the battles to come. "Okay," I said, managing a small smile. "Let's see what you can remember. Every bit of information could be crucial." As we settled in for a long discussion, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the cusp of something momentous. The search for the standing stones, the quest to seal away the darkness, the struggle to save Darkwood. It all seemed to be coming to a head. Little did I know, the true test of our resolve, and the ultimate price we might have to pay, was still to come. The search for the standing stones consumed our days and nights. Tom's team scoured the forest, while Jess and I pored over every historical document we could find. My parents, true to their word, joined our efforts, struggling to recall any useful information from their time under the cult's influence. It was on a bitter cold morning in early February when we finally got our break. I was at the library with Jess when my phone buzzed with a message from Tom. "Found something. Meet at the old quarry, hurry." We raced to the site, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. As we approached, we saw Tom and his team gathered around the entrance to a long-abandoned mine shaft. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hushed with anticipation. Tom's face was grim but excited. "We found markings," he said, leading us to the mine's entrance. "Look." Carved into the rock were symbols similar to those we'd seen in the old texts. Concentric circles, strange runes, and what looked like a crude map. Jess gasped. "It's a guide," she breathed. "To the standing stones." Harold arrived moments later, his eyes widening as he saw the markings. "This changes everything," he muttered. "If the stones are hidden in these caves, then we need to go in," I finished, a mixture of determination and fear coursing through me. We quickly assembled a team, myself, Jess, Tom, Harold, and 2 of Tom's most experienced scouts. Armed with flashlights, rope, and supplies, we ventured into the dark mouth of the mine. The air grew colder as we descended, our footsteps echoing ominously off the damp stone walls. After what felt like hours of navigating twisting tunnels and treacherous drops, we emerged into a vast underground cavern. And there they were, the standing stones. 7 massive monoliths arranged in a perfect circle, their surfaces covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen throughout our research. "It's incredible," Jess whispered, her voice filled with awe. As we approached the circle, a low humming filled the air. The symbols on the stones began to glow with a faint pulsing light. "Careful," Harold warned. "We don't know what might trigger." Before he could finish, a blinding flash erupted from the center of the circle. When my vision cleared, I saw a shimmering, translucent barrier stretching between the stones. "The veil," Harold breathed. "The barrier between worlds. It's weakening." Suddenly, a bone-chilling screech echoed through the cavern. Dark, writhing shapes began to press against the other side of the barrier, their forms too horrifying to comprehend. "We need to seal it," Tom shouted over the increasing din. "Now!" Jess fumbled with her backpack, pulling out the ancient tome we'd brought. "The ritual," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to perform it before the barrier fails completely." As Jess began to recite the words, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The shapes beyond the barrier became more frenzied, their inhuman cries rising to a fever pitch. I felt a tugging sensation in my chest, an invisible force pulling me towards the circle. With dawning horror, I realized what was happening. "The willing sacrifice," I gasped. "It's choosing." Jess's eyes widened in panic. "No!" she cried, reaching for me. But an invisible barrier held her back. As I was drawn inexorably towards the center of the circle, memories flashed before my eyes. Discovering the cult, fighting alongside the resistance, the bonds I'd forged with Jess and the others. I thought of my parents, finally free from the cult's influence, and of all the innocent people in Darkwood who would suffer if we failed. In that moment, I made my choice. "Keep reading," I shouted to Jess. "No matter what happens, finish the ritual." "Lisa, no," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another way." But I knew there wasn't. As I stepped into the center of the circle, the barrier between worlds rippled and surged. The dark entities on the other side recoiled, as if burned by my presence. I turned to face my friends one last time. "Tell my parents I love them," I said, managing a small smile. "And don't you dare blame yourselves. This is my choice." As Jess continued the ritual, her voice choked with sobs. I felt the energy of the stones coursing through me. The barrier began to solidify, pushing back the darkness. In my final moments, as the veil between worlds closed around me, I saw the gratitude and sorrow in my friend's eyes. I saw the future I was saving, a Darkwood free from the cult's shadow, where people could live without fear. And then, in a flash of blinding light, I was gone. The cavern fell silent, the humming of the stones fading to a gentle pulse. The barrier between worlds stood strong once more, reinforced by my sacrifice. As my friend stood in shocked silence, trying to process what had just happened, a soft whisper seemed to echo through the cave. My voice carried on an otherworldly breeze. "It's okay. I'm still here watching over Darkwood. Always." And with that, the greatest battle for Darkwood's soul came to an end, leaving those left behind to grapple with the cost of victory and the legacy of a sacrifice freely given. The aftermath of my sacrifice left a palpable void in Darkwood. Days turned into weeks, and the town slowly began to heal, though the weight of what had transpired in the cavern hung heavy on those who knew the truth. Jess stood at the edge of Darkwood Forest, her eyes fixed on the tree line where we had first stumbled upon the cult's ritual months ago. The winter chill was giving way to the first hints of spring, but she felt numb to the changing seasons. "I thought I'd find you here," came Harold's voice from behind her. Jess didn't turn around. "I keep thinking she'll just walk out of those trees," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like it was all just a bad dream." Harold placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Lisa made her choice, Jess. She saved us all. But at what cost?" Jess whirled around, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "We were supposed to find another way. We promised we wouldn't resort to sacrifice." "Sometimes," Harold said gently, "the noblest path is not the one we expect to take." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Tom and Detective Chen. Both looked grim. "We've got a problem," Chen said without preamble. "The seals on the mine entrance have been broken. Someone's been down there." Jess felt her heart race. "The standing stones? Are they—" "Undisturbed," Tom cut in. "But there was evidence of some kind of ritual being performed nearby. We found this." He held up a small, intricately carved stone figurine. Its features were warped, almost melted, as if it had been subjected to intense heat. Harold's eyes widened in recognition. "This is an anchor stone," he said, "used in certain summoning rituals to create a tether between worlds." "You mean someone's trying to undo what Lisa did?" Jess asked, her voice rising in panic. Chen nodded grimly. "It looks that way, and we have a pretty good idea who's behind it." "The remnants of the cult," Harold said, his expression darkening. "They're making their move." Over the next few days, a plan began to take shape. The Resistance, now working openly with law enforcement, set up patrols around the mine entrance and key locations throughout town. Jess threw herself into research, determined to find a way to strengthen the barrier without another sacrifice. It was during one of her late-night study sessions in the library that something strange happened. As Jess pored over an ancient text, the air around her seemed to shimmer. A familiar scent, my favorite perfume, wafted through the room. "Lisa?" Jess whispered, her heart pounding. For a moment she could have sworn she saw a faint outline of a figure standing nearby. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Shaken, Jess rushed to share her experience with the others. They gathered at Harold's farm, the tension palpable. "It's not just Jess," Tom said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Some of us have been experiencing things. Whispers, glimpses, feelings of a presence." Harold stroked his chin thoughtfully. "The barrier between worlds may be more permeable than we realized. Lisa's sacrifice didn't just seal away the darkness. It seems she's become a guardian of sorts." "But what does this mean for the cult's plans?" Chen asked. "If they're trying to break through—" A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, cutting her off. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, Everyone in the room felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. Jess gasped. "It's Lisa," she said with certainty. "She's trying to warn us. We need to get to the mines now." They raced to the quarry, arriving to find a group of hooded figures gathered at the mine entrance. A swirling vortex of dark energy pulsed at the center of their circle. "Stop," Chen shouted, drawing her weapon. "You're under arrest." The cultists turned, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You're too late," one of them sneered. "The gateway is opening. Our master will—" His words were cut short as a blinding flash of light erupted from the mine shaft. A familiar figure stepped forward, translucent, glowing, but unmistakably me. "Lisa," Jess breathed, tears streaming down her face. I smiled at my friends before turning to face the cultists. "Your master has no power here," I said, my voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. "This world is under my protection." With a gesture, the dark vortex collapsed in on itself. The cultists cried out in shock and fear as their connection to whatever entity they were summoning was severed. As Chen and her officers moved in to apprehend the stunned cultists, I turned back to my friends. "I can't stay long," I said, my form already beginning to fade. "But know that I'm always watching over Darkwood. The barrier holds, but it needs guardians on both sides." "We'll keep fighting," Jess promised, her voice choked with emotion. "We won't let your sacrifice be in vain." I smiled one last time before disappearing, leaving behind a sense of peace and renewed purpose. As the group stood there, processing what had just happened, Harold spoke up. "This isn't the end," he said solemnly. "It's a new beginning. We've been given a second chance to protect Darkwood, and we can't squander it." Jess nodded, wiping away her tears. "Lisa showed us the way. Now it's up to us to follow in her footsteps and keep the darkness at bay." As they left the quarry, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest whisper of my voice. Together, always. The battle for Darkwood's soul had entered a new phase, with guardians both seen and unseen working to preserve the delicate balance between worlds. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, they faced it with renewed hope and determination, knowing that some bonds transcend even the barriers between life and death. As spring blossomed in Darkwood, a tentative normalcy settled over the town. The capture of the cultists at the mine had dealt a significant blow to the remaining dark forces, but everyone remained vigilant. The veil between worlds, though strengthened by my sacrifice, still required constant protection. Jess had taken up residence in Harold's farmhouse, converting one of the spare rooms into a makeshift research center. Maps, ancient texts, and hastily scribbled notes covered every surface. On this particular morning, she sat hunched over a weathered tome, dark circles under her eyes betraying her lack of sleep. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, stifling a yawn. Tom entered, carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. "Thought you could use some fuel," he said, setting the tray down. "Any breakthroughs?" Jess shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "Nothing concrete. I keep finding references to anchors and tethers, but it's also vague." Tom nodded sympathetically. "We'll figure it out. Lisa wouldn't want you running yourself into the ground like this." At the mention of my name, a familiar warmth seemed to fill the room. Jess and Tom exchanged glances, both feeling the unmistakable presence. "She's here," Jess whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. "I can feel it." The moment was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Detective Chen, her face etched with concern. "We've got a situation," she announced without preamble. "There's been a break-in at the town archives." "The archives?" Tom asked, brow furrowed. "What would anyone want there?" Chen's expression darkened. "We're not sure, but several historical documents are missing. And—" She hesitated. "There was a symbol left behind, one we haven't seen before." She held up her phone, displaying a photo of a strange, twisted glyph painted on the archive wall. Jess leaned in, her eyes widening in recognition. "I've seen this," she breathed. "In one of the older texts. It's associated with time manipulation." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implication sank in. "You don't think," Tom began, his voice low, "that they're trying to change the past? To undo what we've accomplished?" Before anyone could respond, the air shimmered, and a faint outline of my form appeared. Though I couldn't speak directly, my presence conveyed a sense of urgency and warning. Jess straightened up, a new determination in her eyes. "We need to gather everyone now." Within the hour, the core members of the resistance had assembled at the farmhouse. Harold, looking more haggard than ever, addressed the group. "Friends," he began, his voice grave, "we face a new threat, one that could unravel everything we've fought for. If these cultists have found a way to manipulate time, then Lisa's sacrifice could be undone," Jess finished, her voice barely above a whisper. A murmur of concern rippled through the group. My parents, who had become invaluable members of the resistance, clutched each other's hands tightly. "What can we do?" my father asked, his voice trembling slightly. "How do we fight something like this?" Harold turned to Jess. "You've been researching the barrier, the connections between worlds. What have you found?" Jess took a deep breath. I think Lisa isn't just guarding the barrier. She's become part of it. A linchpin, holding everything together across time and space. Which means," Tom interjected, "if they change the past, they could remove Lisa from the equation entirely." The room fell silent as the weight of this realization settled over everyone. Then, unexpectedly, a warm breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of summer flowers. My presence, more palpable than ever. Jess stood up, her eyes shining with a mix of tears and determination. "Lisa's showing us the way. We need to strengthen her connection to our world, create our own anchors to keep her tethered here, no matter what happens." "But how?" Chen asked, her usual pragmatism tinged with a hint of desperation. "The Standing Stones," Harold said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with understanding. "They're not just a gateway, they're a nexus point. If we could somehow attune them to Lisa's essence." "A ritual," my mother breathed, surprising everyone. "Not a dark one, but a ritual of love and memory, to bind Lisa to this world through our connection to her." As the group began to formulate a plan, I felt a surge of emotion. Pride, love, and a fierce protectiveness for these people who had become so much more than friends. They were my anchors, keeping me tethered to a world I had sacrificed everything to protect. The battle for Darkwood was far from over. The enemy was adapting, evolving, reaching across time itself to undo our victories. But as I watched my loved ones rally together, I knew that the bonds we had forged were stronger than any dark force could ever hope to be. As the meeting concluded, and the group dispersed to prepare for the challenges ahead, Jess lingered in the room. She looked up, seeming to gaze directly at where my spectral form hovered. "We won't let you down, Lisa," she said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together, always." A gentle touch on her cheek, the softest brush of ethereal fingertips, was my silent reply. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, but with love as our shield and memory as our anchor, we would face it united, guardians of a town balanced on the edge of two worlds. The preparations for the ritual to strengthen my connection to Darkwood consumed the next few days. Jess barely slept, dividing her time between researching ancient texts and coordinating with the others. The tension in the air was palpable, a race against time as we all felt the looming threat of the cult's temporal manipulations. On the eve of the ritual, Jess stood at the edge of the forest, gazing at the stars. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. "You always loved stargazing," she murmured, knowing I was listening. "Remember how we used to sneak out to that hill behind your house?" A soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faintest whisper of laughter. My laughter. "I miss you so much, Lisa," Jess continued, her voice breaking. "I hope this works." I hope we can keep you with us. She's always with us, came Harold's voice as he approached. And after tomorrow, her presence will be even stronger. Jess turned to face him, worry etched on her features. What if we're wrong? What if this ritual somehow weakens the barrier instead of strengthening it? Harold placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Faith, Jess. Faith in Lisa, and faith in the bonds we've forged. That's what will see us through. As dawn broke the next day, a solemn procession made its way to the hidden cavern of the Standing Stones. Each person carried an item of significance: photos, trinkets, mementos of shared experiences with me. My parents led the way, clutching my favorite childhood teddy bear between them. Upon entering the cavern, everyone gasped. The air shimmered with an otherworldly light, and the standing stones pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow. "She's here," Tom whispered, awe in his voice. "Lisa's waiting for us." Jess stepped forward, unfolding an ancient parchment. "Everyone, form a circle around the stones. Focus on your memories of Lisa, on the love and connection you share with her." As the group took their positions, Jess began to recite the ritual words, a mixture of ancient languages and modern sentiment, binding past and present, love and magic. "We call upon the forces that bridge worlds," she intoned, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We offer our memories, our love, as anchors to tether our guardian to this realm." One by one, each person stepped forward, placing their memento at the base of a standing stone and sharing a cherished memory. "Remember the time we went camping and you insisted on telling ghost stories?" my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You scared yourself so badly you couldn't sleep without holding our hands." My mother smiled through her tears. "Or your high school graduation, how proud you were. How proud we are of you." As each memory was shared, the air grew thicker with energy. The standing stone's glow intensified, and a translucent figure began to form in the center of the circle. Me, more visible than I had been since my sacrifice. Jess was the last to step forward, clutching a friendship bracelet we had made together years ago. "Lisa," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you've always been my rock, my anchor. Now it's our turn to be yours." As she placed the bracelet down, a blinding flash of light erupted from the stones. Everyone shielded their eyes, and when they looked again, I stood before them, not quite solid, but more present than ever before. "It worked," I said, my voice echoing with an otherworldly timbre. "I can feel it, the connection, stronger than ever." Joyous cries filled the cavern as my parents rushed forward, their hands passing through me but still feeling a warmth, a tangible presence. "My darling," my mother sobbed. "Oh, how we've missed you." "I'm here," I assured them, looking around at the tear-streaked faces of my loved ones. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." But even as the celebration continued, a dark shadow passed over my face. "There's more you need to know," I said, my tone growing serious. "The cult. They're not just trying to change the past. They're attempting to summon something ancient and terrible." A hush fell over the group as I continued. "With this stronger connection, I can see more clearly across the veil. They're planning a ritual of their own, one that could tear apart the very fabric of reality." "When?" Harold asked, his face grim. 3 days from now during the new moon," I replied. "We don't have much time." Jess stepped forward, determination blazing in her eyes. "Then we'll be ready. We stopped them before, and we'll do it again." As the group began to discuss strategies, I felt a surge of love and pride. This was why I had made my sacrifice. To protect these people, this town, this world. And now, anchored more firmly to the realm of the living, I was ready to fight alongside them once more. The battle for Darkwood's soul was entering its final, most crucial phase. The cult's desperate gambit to undo our victories had instead made us stronger, more united. As I looked at the faces of my friends and family, I knew that whatever horrors the coming days might bring, the air crackled with tension as our group stood before the standing stones deep within the cavern. The ritual to strengthen my connection to this world was about to begin, but the weight of what was at stake hung heavy on everyone's shoulders. Jess stood at the center of the circle, clutching a small pouch filled with items that held significance to me. A pressed flower from our childhood, a piece of the shirt I wore on the night of my sacrifice, and a lock of my hair that my mother had kept. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to speak the words we had carefully pieced together from ancient texts and intuition. "Lisa," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Guardian of the Veil, protector of Darkwood. We call to you across the boundaries of life and death, of time and space. Hear us, feel us, anchor yourself to this realm." As she spoke, the air around the stones began to shimmer, and my presence became more tangible. The others, Harold, Tom, my parents, Detective Chen, and a handful of trusted resistance members, formed a circle around Jess, their hands linked. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the cavern. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. "They're here," Harold called out, his voice tight with urgency. "The cultists. They're trying to disrupt the ritual." Outside the circle, shadowy figures began to materialize. Twisted, ethereal forms of the cultists we had faced before. They clawed at the air, trying to break through the protective barrier our circle had formed. "Keep going," Tom shouted to Jess. "We'll hold them off." As Jess continued the ritual, pouring her heart and memories into every word, the others began to fight back against the encroaching darkness. My parents, drawing on strength they didn't know they possessed, stood firm against the onslaught. Detective Chen, her usual pragmatism replaced by fierce determination, used her knowledge of the cult's weaknesses to repel their attacks. I felt myself being pulled in two directions, drawn towards the ritual circle, but also compelled to help my friends fight. It was then that I realized the true nature of my role as guardian. With a surge of will, I projected my essence outward, creating a shimmering dome that enveloped the entire group. The cultists' attacks bounced off harmlessly, their howls of frustration echoing through the cavern. "Lisa," Jess gasped, feeling the surge of energy. "You're doing it." Inside the protective dome, the ritual continued. Each member of the circle began to speak, sharing memories and moments that tied them to me. My father's voice cracked as he spoke. "I remember teaching you to ride a bike, the pride I felt when you first pedaled away on your own." My mother added, tears streaming down her face. "The day you stood up to those bullies in school, defending a kid you barely knew. That's when I knew you'd grow up to be someone special." Tom, usually so stoic, let his guard down as he recalled. "That time we got lost in the woods during the camping trip, and you kept everyone's spirits up with your terrible jokes." As each memory was shared, I felt my connection to this world growing stronger. The items in the pouch Jess held began to glow with an otherworldly light. But the cultists weren't giving up. They began to chant in an eldritch tongue, the very air around us seeming to warp and twist. "They're trying to rewrite time," Harold shouted over the din. "We need to finish the ritual now." Jess, her face etched with determination, raised her voice for the final part of the ritual. "Lisa, bound by love, anchored by memory, we offer you a tether to our world. Not as a chain, but as a lifeline. Protect us, guide us, be with us. Always." As the last word left her lips, a blinding flash of light erupted from the standing stones. The cultists' chants turned to screams as they were thrown backward, their shadowy forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. When the light faded, I stood before them, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a shimmering, translucent version of myself. I could feel the strength of their love and memories flowing through me, anchoring me to this world more firmly than ever before. "It worked," I said, my voice carrying the echo of two worlds. "I'm here. Really here." Jess rushed forward, her hand passing through mine but feeling a warmth where we connected. Lisa, she sobbed, joy and relief evident in her voice. The cult's attempt to change the past has failed, I announced, looking at each of my loved ones in turn. But this isn't the end. They'll try again, find new ways to threaten Darkwood. Harold nodded gravely. But now we're better prepared. With you truly by our side, we stand a fighting chance. As we made our way out of the cavern, I felt the dual nature of my existence. One foot in the world of the living, one in the realm beyond. But the tether created by this ritual, forged from love and memory, gave me a strength I had never known before. The battle for Darkwood's soul had entered a new phase. With the past secured and my presence anchored, we faced the future with renewed hope and determination. Whatever darkness lay ahead, we would face it together. Guardians of a town perched on the edge of two worlds, bound by bonds stronger than death itself. The weeks following the ritual brought a newfound sense of balance to Darkwood. My presence, now more tangible than ever, served as both comfort and protection to the town. But we knew better than to let our guard down completely. On a warm summer evening, Jess sat on the porch of Harold's farmhouse, poring over the latest batch of research materials. I materialized beside her, my form shimmering in the fading daylight. "You should take a break," I said gently. "You've been at this for hours." Jess looked up, a tired smile on her face. "I know, but I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something. The cult's been too quiet lately." As if on cue, Tom's truck came barreling up the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. He jumped out, his face etched with urgency. "We've got trouble," he announced as he reached the porch. "There's been a breach at the old factory on the edge of town. Chen's already on her way with a team." Jess was on her feet in an instant. "The factory? But that place has been abandoned for years." I felt a chill run through my ethereal form. "Not abandoned," I said, the knowledge coming to me from somewhere beyond. "Hidden." We piled into Tom's truck and sped towards the outskirts of Darkwood. As we approached the dilapidated factory, we could see flashing police lights and a small crowd gathered behind a hastily erected barrack. The weeks following the ritual had brought an uneasy calm to Darkwood. My ethereal presence, now a constant guardian, had seemingly deterred any immediate threats from the remnants of the cult. But we all knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and struck again. On a misty autumn morning, Jess stood at the edge of the forest, her breath forming small clouds in the cool air. I materialized beside her, my form shimmering in the weak sunlight. "You're worried," I observed, not needing to ask. Jess nodded, her eyes fixed on the tree line. "It's too quiet. They're planning something big, I can feel it." Before I could respond, we heard rapid footsteps approaching. Tom burst through the undergrowth, his face pale with urgency. "We've got trouble," he panted. "Big trouble." Back at Harold's farm, now our de facto headquarters, the resistance had gathered. The tension in the room was palpable as Tom laid out the situation. "3 more people have gone missing," he explained, pointing to a map on the wall. "All from different parts of town, all within the last 24 hours. Detective Chen, her face grim, added, "And we found this at each location." She held up a small, twisted piece of metal, covered in strange symbols. Harold leaned in, his eyes widening in recognition. "It's a chronoshard," he breathed, "a piece of a larger device used for manipulating time." A collective gasp went through the room. My mother, her voice shaking slightly, asked, "Does this mean they're trying to change the past again?" I felt a strange pull, as if the very fabric of reality was being tugged at. "Not just the past," I said, my voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. "I think they're trying to collapse time itself." Jess's face paled. "But that would destroy everything," Harold finished. "Past, present, and future, all crumbling into chaos." The room erupted into panicked discussion. I raised my hand, calling for silence. "We need to find the rest of the device," I said. "These shards are like breadcrumbs leading us to their main base of operations." Tom nodded, already moving towards the door. "I'll gather a search team. We'll comb every inch of this town if we have to." As the others began to mobilize, Jess pulled me aside. "Lisa," she said, her voice low, "if they're messing with time on this scale, what happens to you? To your anchor here?" I felt a flutter of uncertainty, something I hadn't experienced since becoming a guardian. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we can't let that stop us. Darkwood, the whole world, is at stake." Over the next few days, the resistance worked tirelessly. Tom's search team scoured the town, while Jess and Harold pored over ancient texts, looking for any information on the time manipulation device. My parents, along with other trusted townspeople, kept watch for any unusual activity. It was on the fourth day that we got our break. One of Tom's teams, searching an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, stumbled upon a hidden underground chamber. As we gathered at the entrance to the chamber, I felt a powerful surge of dark energy. "This is it," I said, my form flickering slightly in response to the malevolent force. "Whatever they're planning, it's happening here." Jess squeezed my hand, or at least the space where my hand would be. "We're ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Together, right?" I nodded, looking around at the brave faces of my friends and family. "Together," I echoed. As we descended into the chamber, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. At the center of the room stood a massive device, pulsing with an eerie light. Chronoshards, like the ones we'd found, orbited around it in a dizzying dance. And there, operating the device, were the remaining cultists. Their leader, a gaunt figure with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, turned to face us. "Ah, the meddlers arrive," he sneered. "Just in time to witness the end of everything you hold dear." Detective Chen stepped forward, her gun raised. "Step away from the device," she commanded. "You're under arrest." The cult leader laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to echo from multiple points in time. "Arrest? You fool. In moments, the concept of law, of time itself, will be meaningless. We will reshape reality to our will." I felt a violent tugging, as if my very essence was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. The anchor that bound me to this world, forged through love and memory, began to strain. "Lisa!" Jess cried out, seeing my form flicker and distort. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. This threat was beyond anything we had faced before. It would take everything I had, perhaps more than I could give, to stop it. "Whatever happens," I said, my voice carrying to each of my loved ones, "know that I love you, and that Darkwood will always have a guardian in one form or another." Before anyone could stop me, I surged forward, throwing myself into the heart of the time manipulation device. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of foreboding, as Darkwood prepared for what we hoped would be the final confrontation with the cult. Months had passed since the ritual that had anchored me more firmly to this world, and in that time, we had worked tirelessly to unravel the cult's plans and gather our strength. Jess stood at the edge of the forest, her gaze fixed on the tree line. I materialized beside her, my form shimmering in the fading daylight. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, my voice carrying an otherworldly echo. Jess nodded, her jaw set with determination. "As ready as we'll ever be. But Lisa, what if we're wrong? What if this isn't the end?" I placed a spectral hand on her shoulder, and though she couldn't feel it physically, I saw her relax at the gesture. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together. Always." Our moment was interrupted by the arrival of Tom and Detective Chen, both looking grim but resolute. "The teams are in position," Tom reported. "Harold's got the perimeter secured, and your parents are standing by with the emergency response unit." Chen added, "We've evacuated the surrounding areas under the guise of a chemical spill. If this goes south, at least civilian casualties will be minimized." As we made our way deeper into the forest, towards the hidden cave system we'd discovered was the cult's new base of operations, I felt a growing sense of unease. The very air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made my spectral form flicker. "Something's not right," I murmured. "They're expecting us." No sooner had the words left my mouth than the ground beneath our feet began to tremble.